you wake up to darkness. Not the cozy darkness of a winter morning where you can still sense the glow of the sun straining through curtains, but a darkness that feels almost solid. Outside your longhouse, the Scandinavian winter sky is a slate of endless night, pierced only by stars that seem far too distant to matter. The sun, when it bothers to rise, drifts lazily across the horizon for a few brief hours, like a half-hearted candle. You learn not to count on it. Morning and evening blur together until time of day is little more than a polite guess. The air in the hall feels brittle. You can see your breath rising in faint clouds, as though you and everyone else inside are leaking ghosts. Wool wraps around your shoulders, but the cold ignores such gestures. Slinks into your bones, a quiet tenant who refuses eviction. You pull your cloak tighter, but the chill persists, amused by your efforts. Your straw-stuffed bedding feels stiff, the stalks poking through the thin fabric as if they restaging a small rebellion against your skin. You might long for the comfort of feathers, but know your pillow is more straw, possibly with a sprinkle of flea drama included at no extra cost. The longhouse itself creaks against the weight of snow on the roof. Every gust of wind outside rattles the timber walls, which were meant to keep out the elements but instead act like enthusiastic collaborators, letting in drafts wherever they can. You get the sense the house isn't so much a barrier against the cold as a friendly suggestion that it might consider staying out. The longhouse is sturdy, yes, but insulation is not its strong suit. The smell of smoke lingers, a permanent perfume clinging to your hair, your clothes, even your skin. It mixes with the earthy temps of livestock kept close, and the faint sourness of fermented foods stored against the walls. If you've ever thought your modern apartment could use a little fresh air, consider the Viking solution. None. Opening a window isn't really an option when you don't have glass in the wind outside, could turn your breath into icicles before it leaves your lips. So you sit in a constant fog of fire and humanity, and yet despite the sting in your eyes and the scratch in your throat, you would not dare complain. Out the fire, you wouldn't last a night. The quiet of the long winter stretches differently than any modern silence. There are no car horns, no distant hum of refrigerators, no whir of appliances. Instead, you hear the slow, methodical sounds of survival, the pop and hiss of logs as they give themselves to the flames, shuffle of wool-clad feet, the occasional cough echoing across the hall. The rhythm of the long night is steady, patient, and unforgiving. If you think you'll pass the hours by counting them down, think again. Winter in Scandinavia is less of a season and more of a mood one that overstays its welcome. Days bleed into nights, nights into days, until you stop keeping track. You might measure time by how many times the fire needs feeding, or how many meals of salted fish remain in the storehouse. The calendar is less about months and more about survival milestones. We made it past Yule. The ale is still holding out. We haven't run out of firewood yet. What makes the long night particularly brutal is its relentlessness. Modern winter gives you the mercy of distraction, fluorescent lights, warm cars, insulated walls. Here, there is no hiding. Darkness presses against every crack of the hall, reminding you that it is always out there, waiting. When you step outside, snow crunches beneath your boots like glass. The wind nips at exposed skin until your cheeks sting, and within minutes your nose feels like it might abandon ship. Even in daylight hours, the sun hangs low, casting long, strange shadows that make the world look like twilight theater. And yet, despite the hardship, you begin to adjust. Humans always do. Your eyes learn to work with dim light. Your body teaches itself to sleep and wake without a strict schedule. And your mind finds ways to fill the emptiness. You listen more carefully, noticing the difference between the howl of the wind and the quieter sigh of drifting snow. You become familiar with the rhythms of those around you, each cough, each footstep, each shift under heavy wool blankets. There is also, strangely, a beauty to it all. When you step outside on a clear night, the stars blaze brighter than you ever imagined. The northern lights may ripple across the sky in green and violet, a cosmic dance just for you and whoever else is hardy enough to stay awake. For a moment, the endless night feels less like punishment and more like a gift, otherworldly, breathtaking, timeless. Of course, your fingers begin to ache and your nose runs almost immediately, so the awe is short-lived. Still, it's there. Back in the longhouse, you huddle close to others, grateful for shared body heat and the sound of life around you. Winter may be long, but it is not endured alone. Every cough, every laugh, every snore is proof that your people are still here, still clinging to warmth in defiance of the season. And as the night stretches on, you realize that the key to surviving the Scandinavian winter is not to fight it, but to yield to its rhythm, slow, deliberate, persistent. In this rhythm, one thing anchors you more than any other: the fire. The hearth becomes your constant companion, the line between life and cold oblivion. And so, as the long night continues, your attention shifts to the delicate business of keeping that flame alive. You find yourself staring into the hearth as though it were a living creature. In a sense, it is. The fire has moods, temperaments, even needs, and if you don't pay attention, it sulks, withers, and dies. Hey, Viking Scandinavia. The hearth is not a convenience. It is the quiet heartbeat of the longhouse, the only dependable sun in a land where the real one has gone missing for months. Without it, the walls are only timber, the roof only thatch, and your body just one more brittle object waiting to freeze. Tending the fire is a task that doesn't belong to a single person. Everyone takes turns, for everyone depends on it. You shuffle forward, knees creaking as you kneel on packed earth near the hearthstones. The glow is hypnotic. Embers pulse like tiny stars fallen into your hands. Your fingers are stiff, but you reach for the iron poker, nudging the logs into a better arrangement. They hiss and spit as damp patches release little bursts of steam, like complaints from a reluctant servant. Making the fires is an art you are expected to master quickly. At night, when others drift into uneasy slumber, you crouch and cover the embers with a blanket of ash, smothering them just enough to keep them alive until morning. It feels counterintuitive, like tucking a child into bed with dirt. But the ash keeps the glow breathing quietly, ready to flare back into life with a little coaxing. If you let the fire die, you'll know by the frost forming on your eyelashes at dawn and the reproach in every pair of eyes that meets yours. In winter, a careless ember can cost lives. The fire doesn't just warm, it cooks. Every pot of thin stew, every kettle of weak ale, every slab of fish dried near the smoke depends on its steady heat. You stir the flames and imagine the taste of barley porridge thickening above it. The smell of smoke is inescapable, seeping into woolen cloaks, hair, and even skin. After a while, you stop noticing. To an outsider, you probably smell like a walking bonfire, but to you it's the scent of survival. Gathering fuel is a constant anxiety. The wood stacked in neat piles outside is finite, collected feverishly before the first snow arrived. Each log you place on the fire is weighed in your mind. Is it worth burning now, or can you stretch it longer? You know well that trudging out into knee-high drifts to chop frozen wood is nearly impossible. So you ration the logs, adding smaller sticks, even dried animal dung if the stockpile runs low. The flames don't care about dignity. They'll consume whatever you feed them. The hearth is also a gathering place. People sit in a rough circle around it, backs to the cold walls, faces turned to the warmth. Children creep closer than they should, eyes wide with fascination, until an elder warns them back with a sharp word. You know why the longhouse is wood, the roof is thatch, and a stray spark can transform comfort into catastrophe. Everyone remembers stories of fires that devoured entire farms in one unlucky night. The hearth gives life, but it can just as easily take it away. In the quiet moments, you notice how the flames change the atmosphere of the hall. Shadows leap along the walls, dancing with each flicker. The cracks in the timber seem to widen and close, like the house itself is breathing. You watch the patterns in the smoke curling toward the vent in the roof, sometimes escaping smoothly, sometimes sulking back down to sting your eyes. It is mesmerizing, a lullaby for the senses. In the endless night of winter, even the smallest motions become entertainment. And so you tend, you guard, you feed. The fire becomes your closest companion, responding instantly to your care or neglect. You find yourself whispering to it, coaxing it along like an old friend. There is comfort in knowing that as long as it lives, you do too. But of course, fire alone cannot carry you through the night. Warmth flickers, fades, and can only stretch so far in the cavernous hall. To survive truly, You must turn to the bodies beside you, the press of family and neighbors lying shoulder to shoulder in the dark. Fire gives light, but people give warmth, and so the story drifts naturally from guarding the hearth to sharing the bed. Night comes, though in Viking Scandinavia, night is more of a suggestion than a defined boundary. You lie down with the others in the longhouse, though to call it going to bed feels generous. Beds are not a feature here. What you have instead are shared sleeping spaces along the sides of the hall. Wooden benches, layered with sacks of straw or dried reeds, double as daytime seating and nighttime bedding. The straw pokes through the cloth, scratching your skin in ways you'll never quite get used to. When it shifts, it crackles faintly, like a chorus of tiny dry voices, reminding you that comfort is not part of the package. And then there are the fleas. Congratulations. Your bedding comes with free tenants. Fleas and lice thrive in the straw, in woolen cloaks, in your hair. You may try to ignore the itching, convincing yourself it's just your imagination, but inevitably you find yourself scratching in the dark. Everyone does. It's not a matter of cleanliness. Bathing in a Scandinavian winter is more theory than practice. It's simply part of life. If you're lucky, you only notice them for the first few minutes before the cold and exhaustion lull you into uneasy rest. You don't sleep alone. Privacy is a modern luxury. Your survival requires company. You press close to family members, friends, servants, anyone who can contribute their body heat. People lie in rows, layered under woolen blankets and animal furs, cocooned against the biting drafts that creep through the hall's walls. Sometimes even livestock shares the space, a cow or a few goats tethered nearby to add their warmth. The smell is robust, a blend of animal musk, smoke, and the sour tang of stored food. But after hours in the freezing air outside, you hardly care. A warm cow smells infinitely better than frostbite. The night is noisy. Someone snores like a sawmill. A child whimpers in their dreams. An old uncle mutters in his sleep. A cough rattles from across the hall, echoing uncomfortably in the smoky air. Boots shift, furs rustle, the fire cracks. It is never silent, but the sounds are reassuring in their own way. Each noise is proof of life, proof that your community is enduring another night together. When you wake in the dark, you don't panic, because you can hear breathing all around you. Shifts of sleep are common. You wake, drift off, wake again, losing track of how many hours have passed. The endless winter night makes it impossible to distinguish midnight from early morning, so people often rise for a while. Poke at the fire, eat a crust of bread, tell a story, and then return to their straw pallet. Sleep is fragmented, not a single stretch, but a series of dips in and out of drowsy states. In some ways, it feels closer to napping than to modern sleep. If you roll over, you may find yourself face to face with a cousin, a sibling, or someone's elbow. Personal space is not on the menu. You sigh, pull your cloak tighter, and adjust as best you can. Complaining is pointless. Everyone else is just as cramped as you are. If you're particularly unlucky, you might end up with someone's icy feet pressed against your legs, a medieval wake-up call that is not nearly as charming as it sounds. Yet there is also comfort here. In the press of bodies and the mingling of breath, you feel a sense of belonging. The longhouse isn't just shelter from the cold, it is a living organism, and you are part of it. Warmth is communal. You survive because others survive. And in the stillness between coughs and snores, you sometimes drift into a dream where the night doesn't feel endless, where summer meadows and fishing boats return to your imagination. The fire flickers faintly at the hall's center, throwing shadows across the beams. You wake occasionally just to watch it, the red glow painting faces in warm tones, softening lines of worry. The fire is steady, but your belly is not. Hunger gnaws at you in the dark, reminding you that warmth is only part of the struggle. To get through the long winter, you'll need to eat whatever has been carefully stored and preserved from months before. And so, as you shift restlessly on your straw bed, your thoughts wander to the rations waiting in barrels and sacks against the wall, and how long they might last. When you wake from the half-sleep of the longhouse, it is not the cold that greets you first, but the emptiness of your stomach. Hunger is a quiet, steady companion during a Scandinavian winter, whispering from the moment you open your eyes to the moment you drift off again. Meals are not about variety, nor even about pleasure, they are about survival. Every bite comes from the foresight of summer and autumn, when frantic hands worked to preserve enough to carry through the months of snow. By midwinter, those stores are no longer comforting piles of plenty, but dwindling supplies that must be carefully managed. You shuffle toward the food stores. Barrels lined against the walls, clay pots sealed with wax, bundles hung high to keep them from the worst of the damp. The first thing you notice is the smell. Salt dominates, sharp and briny, a reminder that much of your diet depends on fish pulled from the sea and preserved before the freeze. And dried cod, brittle and tough, sits stacked in bundles. It's known as stockfish, and you gnaw it like jerky, though it takes more determination than appetite. Your jaw aches from the effort, but you chew on, because chewing's better than starving. Meat, too, lingers here but not fresh. The animals you slaughtered in autumn have been salted, smoked, or dried, transforming into leathery cuts that resist decay. Pork, mutton, occasionally beef, though not much. Most cows are too valuable alive, producing milk and warmth to risk eating before spring. You might boil the dried meat into a stew, softening it enough to chew, but the flavor is still more smoke and salt than anything else. Yet after hours in the cold, that thin stew feels like luxury. Dairy makes its appearance as butter, cheese, and skyr thick, tangy fermented milk product. The skyr tastes sharp, almost sour, but it fills you, and that is what matters. Grain too plays its part: barley, rye, and oats, stored carefully in sacks. Bread made from these grains is dense and heavy, a far cry from anything fluffy or soft. It can double as a weapon if thrown, but when dunked into broth or ale, it softens into something edible. Sometimes it's charred, sometimes undercooked, but no one complains. Freshness is a concept you abandoned months ago. Fruit is a fading memory. Vegetables exist only in the form of onions or hardy cabbages that somehow cling to life through winter storage. Everything else has been dried, salted, smoked, or fermented. Your tongue craves sweetness, but the closest you get is a bit of honey if any survive the autumn feasts or berries preserved in mead. More often than not, desert is a dream, not a dish. And then there is ale. It is weak by modern standards, hardly intoxicating unless you drink it by the bucket. But it is safer than water and easier to stomach than cold snowmelt. Every sip carries a faint yeasty tang, slightly sour, but comforting. Children drink it too, not for fun, but because it is part of daily sustenance. In a winter where food is scarce and spirits are low, ale helps blur the sharp edges of hunger and cold, if only for a while. Meals are small, spread thin, shared carefully. A family head doles out portions with a strict hand, making sure no one eats too freely. You understand why? Waste today could mean hunger tomorrow. The rhythm of eating becomes ritual. A crust of bread in the morning, a stew at night, maybe a sliver of dried fish in between. Your body learns to adjust, though the constant gnawing never truly goes away. Hunger becomes part of the background, like the smoke in the air or the fleas in the bedding, welcome but expected. Every meal you eat is also a reminder of the work that went into storing it. The summer fishing trips, the hours of salting meat, the days spent bent over drying racks in the cold sea wind. You silently thank your past self and your ancestors for knowing how to prepare. Without that labor, your bowl tonight would be empty. Still, rations dwindle. You can't help but glance at the barrels and wonder if they will last until the first thaw. Some winters are harsher than others, and famine is never far away. People remember years when snow fell too early, when fish were scarce, when grains spoiled. Those memories linger like shadows in every meal. You chew slower, savoring not the taste, but the presence of food itself. As you lick the last smear of butter from your fingers, your thoughts drift from food to the art of keeping it. For in Viking Scandinavia, survival isn't just about eating, it's about preserving. And so, from the taste of salty fish and sour skyr, your mind turns to the frantic labor of summer and autumn. When every hour was dedicated to preparing for the endless winter, if the Viking winter is a long siege, then your summer was the frantic stockpiling of ammunition. Every berry, every grain, every fish had to be captured, altered, and stored against the months when the world would turn white and sting your lungs with frost. You might think of preservation as a quiet backroom task jars lined on a shelf, pickles bubbling gently. In Viking Scandinavia, it was noisy, smoky, pungent, and urgent. If you got it wrong, you starved. You remember standing by the shoreline in summer, your fingers raw from gutting fish. Cod and herring were the lifeblood of preservation. They were split, salted, and hung on racks to stiffen into stockfish boards of edible wood, essentially, but protein-rich. The smell was unmistakable, sharp, salty, and permanent. Whole villages smelled of drying fish, and after a while, you stopped noticing. You only noticed when it wasn't there, when something had gone wrong and rot had set in. Salt, too, was a kind of treasure. Hard to produce, costly to trade for, yet essential. It turned raw meat into something that could last months rather than days. In autumn, you salted down pork and lamb, stacking slabs in barrels until the meat looked more mineral than animal. Salt clung to your fingers, cracked your skin, but meant survival. Without it, meat spoiled fast, and wasted meat meant an empty stomach by February. Smoking was another ally. Imagine long houses filled with the haze of smoldering wood, meat dangling overhead like wind chimes that smelled strongly of campfire. The smoke didn't just add flavor, it armored the food against mold and bacteria, and the taste, though strong, became the definition of normal. Children growing up knew no other flavor profile. Smoky wasn't a note, it was the whole song. Grain, the backbone of every meal, needed just as much attention. After harvest, you dried it carefully, stored it in sacks, and tucked those sacks away from damp corners where mold might sneak in. Rats, too, were perpetual thieves. And cats earned their place in households, not for their charm, but for their relentless war against rodents. Every squeak in the night threatened your bread supply. Every paw print on the dirt floor was reassurance. Then there was fermentation, a trick that seemed almost magical. Took milk and transformed it into skyr, tangy and thick, the Vikings' answer to yogurt. You brewed ale from barley, bubbling away in wooden vats, turning water and grain into a drink that would last longer than either ingredient alone. Even cabbages found their way into pickled forms, softened by brine into something sour but edible. Fermentation gave you food that could withstand time and a little variation in flavor, though the sourness took getting used to. Of course, not everything survived. Fruit was fleeting, a memory that vanished by early winter. Fresh greens, too, wilted away. But berries could be dried, and some families mixed them into mead, a honey-based drink that stretched sweetness across the bleak months. Honey itself was precious, used sparingly, a golden memory of summer sunlight when all else was gray and white. Preservation was never just about food, it was about rhythm. The entire year bent around the necessity of winter. Summer was for growing, autumn for slaughtering, preserving, salting, smoking, storing. You didn't complain about the labor because you knew what was coming. You carried the weight of months ahead in every salted fish you stacked, every grain sack you sealed. You weren't just working for the present, you were fighting for the future. And as you look around your stores now in the heart of winter, you realize the true measure of preservation is not abundance, but endurance. The taste may be monotonous, the texture's unappealing, but each piece of dried fish, each crust of bread, is a victory over time and frost. Preservation gave you control, limited, fragile control, over a season otherwise designed to take everything away. Yet even with your larder packed and salted, there's still the constant worry of warmth. For food alone won't keep you alive if the cold seeps into your bones. As your eyes linger on the smoky rafters, you feel the next necessity pressing in, the fire that smolders day, and night, guardian of heat, destroyer of stores if left unchecked. Preservation of food leads naturally into preservation of warmth. When you think of winter companions, you might imagine woolen blankets or a sturdy fire. Up in Viking Scandinavia, sometimes your most reliable heater had 4 legs, cloven hooves, and a smell that lingered no matter how much smoke wafted through the rafters. Animals weren't just resources in the summer and autumn. In the bitter dark of winter, they were roommates, warm, noisy, occasionally inconvenient roommates. The longhouse was not designed for privacy. At one end, your family huddled near the central hearth. At the other, separated perhaps by a low wooden partition or just a vague line in the dirt, your livestock shifted and breathed. Cows, goats, sheep, even pigs, all packed in tightly. Their bodies radiated heat, And in a world without insulation, every degree mattered. You might wrinkle your nose at the thought of sharing your bedroom with a cow, but when frost painted the inside of the walls, that animal warmth was priceless. The air was thick, a combination of wood smoke, damp straw, and animal musk. You breathed it in, whether you wanted to or not. The soundscape of your nights was not silence, but the soft shuffling of hooves. The occasional bleat of a sheep, the rumbling grunt of a pig turning in its sleep. It was hardly restful by modern standards, but you grew used to it. After all, what was a snoring uncle compared to a snorting cow? There was a kind of rhythm to this cohabitation. At dawn, when you stirred from your straw bedding, the animals were already awake, restless, stamping against the cold. You tended them not out of sentiment, but out of necessity. Milk from the cow, wool from the sheep, and even the body heat of a pig all kept you alive. If one sickened and died, it wasn't just a loss of food, it was the loss of a living radiator. Children played among the animals, their bare feet brushing against rough hides. They helped fetch hay or carry water, learning early that these creatures were family in the most practical sense. You didn't name them, or at least not in the way we name pets today, because affection and slaughter were never too far apart. Yet in winter, even knowing the eventual fate of a pig or sheep, you leaned against their sides, borrowing warmth without shame. Of course, there were inconveniences. The smell could be overwhelming. Fleas and lice thrived in the mingled bedding. A careless step in the wrong corner meant a boot caked in something you didn't want to carry back to your own sleeping space. But you endured these things because the alternative, facing the full bite of the Scandinavian night without that shared warmth, was unthinkable. There were small moments of comfort, too. Imagine lying awake, the fire reduced to embers, the cold gnawing at your nose. Beside you, you hear the slow, steady breath of the cow, a sound like a lullaby of survival. The animals didn't care about your worries, didn't share your hunger or your anxieties about the stores running low. They simply existed, and their warmth reminded you that life pushed forward even in the dead of winter. Some households grew almost philosophical about this arrangement. To share breath with animals was to be reminded of your place in the natural order. Not superior, just another creature trying to survive the cold. In a strange way, the lying house blurred the line between human and animal community. You depended on them, they depended on you, and together you weathered the snow. And as you drift back into that uneasy winter sleep, nestled between kin on one side and livestock on the other, you realize survival is not always elegant. Sometimes it's simply practical. Warmth is warmth, even if it comes wrapped in fur and accompanied by the occasional bleat. But of course warmth has another face. The fire itself, a hearth that must never truly die, because if it does, neither will you survive the night. Winter in Viking Scandinavia does not mean hibernation. There is no sleeping through until spring, no curling up under blankets and waiting for the thaw. Every day brings a list of tasks that cannot be ignored. Even when the snow piles knee-deep against the walls of your longhouse and the wind scours your cheeks raw, you don't get to decide whether the animals need feeding or whether wood needs chopping. Cold does not care for excuses. You step outside, pulling a rough wool cloak around your shoulders, the fabric stiff with frost from yesterday's breath. The snow crunches beneath your boots, and within moments the icy air needles its way through every seam. Your hands ache before you've even begun, but there are chores waiting, and time is not a luxury. You start with the animals. They stamp and shuffle in the half-dark of the longhouse, demanding fodder. Pitchforks of hay are hauled, water buckets carried and often cracked with ice. You hammer at the surface with a stick, breaking through so the cattle can drink before it freezes again. Your fingers go numb gripping the handle, but you press on because animals can't wait for warmer weather. Outside, the firewood pile looms like a silent judge. No matter how high you stacked it in autumn, it never feels like enough. You heft the axe, the handle worn smooth, and split logs until your shoulders burn. Each crack of wood echoes in the white silence. You stack the pieces carefully, praying they stay dry under their coverings. The smell of pine resin clings to your gloves, a small comfort against the smell of smoke that permeates everything else. Snow itself becomes a chore. It drifts against the longhouse walls, threatening to bury doorways and block paths. You shovel it aside with crude wooden spades, not for neatness, but to keep entryways clear. The snow is heavy, wet, and it clings to your clothing until you're soaked through. It's easy to imagine collapsing into the drifts, letting the silence take you, but there are always more tasks pulling you upright. Then there's the endless work of mending, repairing harnesses, patching cloaks, restitching worn boots. The cold gnaws at leather and wool alike, and your fingers, stiff with chill, fumble with the bone needle. Each stitch is a reminder that winter isn't still, it is actively trying to undo your preparations. Every week, seem is an invitation for frostbite. Even food requires daily labor. Barrels must be checked, lids secured, mice chased away. Grain is ground into coarse flour with hand corns, stone against stone in a rhythm that seems endless. The sound is dull, steady, hypnotic. Bread must be baked, ale stirred, stew pots watched. Always you are careful not to use too much at once. Every ladle taken today must be weighed against the weeks still to come. Children help where they can, carrying small loads of wood or scattering grain for the chickens that survive winter, tucked into corners of the longhouse. Their laughter briefly lifts the weight of work, though it quickly dissolves into coughs when the cold stings their lungs. Chores in the snow are not grand, not glamorous. They are the kind of tasks that vanish into memory because they feel too ordinary, too repetitive. But survival in Viking Scandinavia is stitched together from these very ordinary acts. Without hauling hay, without chopping wood, without mending boots, there is no chance of seeing spring. And as you drag the last log inside, shaking snow from your cloak, you feel a small satisfaction. The work is never done, but for this moment, the animals are fed, the firewood stacked, the path cleared. It is enough. Tomorrow, of course, the chores will be waiting again, as inevitable as the snow itself. But tonight, you step inside, brushing frost from your eyelashes, grateful for the glow of the fire and the thought of a bowl of stew. And in the quiet, your mind drifts from chores to the deeper rhythms of the season, the long, strange relationship the Vikings had with the endless nights of their winters. The chores are finally done. The animals are fed, the firewood stacked. Darkness presses in against the longhouse walls, thick and unbroken. Outside, the snow glows faintly under the moon, but inside, the only light comes from the hearth. Flames lick upward, painting the rafters in flickering shadows. This is when the longhouse breathes easier. The day's labor fades, and something older, gentler, takes its place. The sharing of stories. You settle onto your straw bedding, pulling your cloak tighter, while others in the household gather closer to the hearth. The fire isn't only warmth, it is theater, temple, and stage. No one has parchment to pass around or books to read aloud. Instead, stories live inside voices, carried from one mouth to another like embers. Someone clears their throat, maybe a parent, maybe a grandparent, and the fire becomes the backdrop for sagas. The sagas are not just entertainment. They are memory and identity. You listen to tales of ancestors, who crossed seas in dragon-proud ships, who fought in battles, who courted danger and sometimes the gods themselves. The details might be embellished. Heroes grow taller, enemies more fearsome. But accuracy is not the point. The point is rhythm, the cadence of words that soothe the ear as much as they stir the imagination. You lean back, half watching the fire, half dreaming yourself into those tales. Sometimes it isn't sagas, but myths. Stories of Odin wandering in disguise, of Thor's hammer striking giants, of Freya's tears of gold. The gods loom larger than life, but in the firelight, they feel oddly close. You can almost imagine Odin himself, perched in the shadows of the rafters, one eye glinting, listening as his own story is retold. These tales bring meaning to the long nights, a reminder that even gods must contend with struggle and fate. But it isn't always myth or legend. Sometimes the stories are smaller, softer. A fisherman recalls the time he pulled in a net so heavy with cod, it nearly capsized his boat. A grandmother repeats a proverb she learned as a child, folding humor into the lesson. Children whisper their own invented tales, weaving animals and spirits into strange adventures that make everyone smile. In a winter where food is scarce and work is relentless, laughter is a luxury worth more than gold. The atmosphere is half dream, half ritual. Sparks pop from the fire, floating briefly before vanishing into the smoky haze. Shadows lean and stretch across the walls, transforming the longhouse into a theater of imagination. You can almost see the giants rising in the smoke, the longships sailing in the flames. The younger children stare wide, pulled into the world of the story so fully that for a moment they forget the cold. Storytelling also holds a practical side. Through tales, you learn what matters: how to read the sky, when to set out to sea, how to treat guests, how to avoid dishonor. Stories are lessons wrapped in entertainment, teaching without lecturing. When someone speaks of a foolish man who ignored a warning and froze in the snow, the message is clear without anyone needing to scold. And so the night stretches on. The fire burns low, but the stories stretch higher, filling the gaps that hunger and hardship leave behind. The longer the night, the more stories are needed, until sleep pulls you under and the words blend into dreams. You drift off to the rhythm of a voice, the flicker of the flames still warming your face, and the sense that you are part of something larger, something carried forward by memory and speech. By morning, the stories will be gone, replaced by chores and hunger and cold once more. But for this brief span of hours gathered around the fire, you are more than just a survivor of winter. You are a participant in a chain of voices, stretching backward to ancestors and forward to generations, yet unborn. And as your eyes close, one thought lingers. In a world of endless night, stories themselves are a kind of light. Tomorrow will demand work, but tonight belongs to words. And soon enough, those words will lead naturally into the songs and rituals that turn long nights into sacred time. When the long night presses in hardest, and the snow piles high against the longhouse walls, you find yourself looking beyond chores, beyond food, beyond even the warmth of the fire. You look upward, inward, depending on your habit of thought, to the gods. For in Viking Scandinavia, surviving winter was not merely a matter of salted fish and firewood. It was also about maintaining favor with forces larger than yourself. The fire crackles, smoke curling toward the smoke hole in the roof, and someone murmurs a prayer. It is simple, not a recited formula from a book. There are no books here, but a whispered appeal. To Thor, for protection against storms; to Freyr, for fertility of the fields come spring; to Odin, for wisdom in the face of hardship. The gods are not distant concepts. They are woven into every worry and every hope. Winter rituals often mean sacrifice. You may picture dramatic altars, but in truth, it could be as ordinary as pouring the first splash of ale onto the floor before drinking, offering it to the unseen. Or it might mean slaughtering a goat, dedicating the blood to the gods while the meat sustains the household. In the dark and the cold, nothing is wasted. Sacrifice is not loss, but sharing. You give a portion, hoping the gods will notice and repay the gesture with mercy. At Yule, the great midwinter festival, the rituals swell into something communal. Families gather, feasting not because they have plenty, but because feasting is an act of defiance against scarcity. Fires burn brighter, logs saved for the occasion thrown onto the hearth with ceremony. Mead is passed around, and toasts are made, not just to one another, but to the gods and the ancestors. Each cup lifted is a bridge between the living and the unseen. You drink to Odin, to Freyr, to the departed who once shared these same walls and same winters. The atmosphere in these moments is half solemn, half joyful. You laugh and sing, but you also sense the weight of ritual. The darkness outside feels less threatening when you know the gods have been acknowledged. Even if you are not entirely sure they are listening, you act as though they are, because to do otherwise would be unthinkable. Sometimes appealing to the gods means consulting the unseen in other ways. Someone might cast runes carved into bone or wood, asking questions about the coming months. The shapes they fall into are read like a message, part chance, part tradition, all wrapped in mystery. The answers may not be clear, but even vague reassurance is better than silence. Children watch these rituals wide-eyed. They learn quickly that the gods are everywhere. In the frost that threatens to crack the walls, in the brief sun that rises low on the horizon, in the storms that lash the coast. Appealing to them is not optional, it is survival in another form. Just as you chop wood and mend boots, you also pour ale and whisper thanks. Every act is insurance against a winter that could turn deadly. And yet, the rituals carry warmth too. They remind you that you are not alone. Your family, your community, your ancestors, your gods are part of the same long struggle. Together, you face the dark. Together, you hope for spring. As the night stretches on, the fire burns lower, and the toasts grow slower. You feel the weight of the gods' presence, not in thunderclaps or visions, but in the steady courage of those around you. Appealing to the gods, in the end, is also appealing to one another to keep faith, to hold fast, to remember that survival is shared. And when the ritual ends, and the longhouse grows quiet again, you are left with the lingering taste of mead and the smell of smoke. Outside, the snow still falls. Inside, you carry the small, flickering certainty that perhaps, just perhaps, the gods have heard. And with that faint reassurance, your thoughts drift to another pressing matter of winter life. The endless labor of keeping clothing patched, boots repaired, and every seam secure against the cold. Step outside the longhouse, crunching through the snow, and you see that survival is not a solitary performance. It is a village act, played out on a stage of ice and silence. Your home is not alone in the frozen landscape. Other longhouses huddle close by, low and wooden, their turf roofs blanketed in snow so thick they almost disappear into the earth itself. Thin ribbons of smoke rise from each smoke hole, curling into the dim winter sky, as if the entire village breathes in unison. Paths connect these houses, carved by countless boots trudging back and forth. They are narrow and uneven, flanked by snow walls that grow higher each week as shovels push drifts aside. Children dart along them in bursts of energy, their laughter sharp in the cold before retreating back inside. The rest of the village moves more slowly. People carry wood, water, fodder, always with purpose, never with haste. There's no rushing in a Viking winter. Every step is measured, deliberate, conserving strength. The sounds of the village are muted but never silent. You hear the lowing of cattle, the bleating of sheep, the ring of an axe, splitting logs. Somewhere a dog barks, sharp against the muffled air. Life continues, but wrapped in a blanket of snow and restraint. No one lingers outdoors longer than necessary. Faces are red with cold, hands hidden in rough wool mittens. Even conversations are brief, half-shouted over the wind before each person hurries back to their hearth. Communal effort binds everyone together. Neighbors help mend roofs sagging under heavy snow. Men take turns breaking the ice on the streams so water can be carried. Women share tasks of spinning, weaving, or tending fires while swapping news. If one family falters, another steps in. Not out of luxury, but necessity. The village cannot afford to lose a household, because in the spring, everyone's hands will be needed again. Survival is not individual. It is collective, even if people occasionally grumble about the noise of another family's goats. Trade continues in its subdued winter form. A neighbor might come knocking with a bundle of dried fish, asking to swap for a handful of barley. Someone else offers wool in exchange for a pot mended. These exchanges are quiet, practical, without ceremony. Coins are scarce, but barter flows easily, keeping variety in a diet that would otherwise be unbearably repetitive. The church, if one stands nearby, offers another gathering place. Christianity is creeping into the north by this time, though it mingles uneasily with old gods and sagas. In winter, the church are an outdoor sacred grove. Depending on your community, becomes a place of prayer, ritual, or simply a reason to leave the longhouse for something more than chores. Faith, like food, is shared. At night, the village transforms. Each smoke hole glows faintly, dots of light in the vast dark. From afar, it looks as though a cluster of stars has landed on the earth. The cold is relentless, but the sight of those lights is comforting. Each represents a hearth, a family awake or asleep, each enduring the same endless winter alongside you. The village in winter is not bustling or vibrant. It is slow, methodical, cautious, but it is alive, and that is what matters. It reminds you that survival is not just your own private battle against frost and hunger, it is something held in common. Each household leaning into the others like stones in a wall. And just as the village holds together, so too must the individual family. Inside the longhouse, family bonds stretch and strain under the pressure of close quarters. Arguments, laughter, stories, and silence all collide in the same smoky air. Which leads naturally to the next part of this winter tale. How families endured the long, cramped months together, without walls to separate them. When you think of Vikings, the picture that leaps to mind is often clashing swords, raiding ships, and noisy chaos. Yet in the heart of winter, warfare in Scandinavia does something unexpected. It falls almost completely silent. The season that demands constant attention to food, warmth, and survival leaves little energy for conquest. Raiders do not set sail when the seas are churned with ice, and armies do not march when every road has turned to frozen mire. Instead, the village settles into a peculiar hush, as if even violence must wait for spring. You notice it in the way weapons are stored rather than sharpened. Axes hang on walls, not raised in fury but resting, their edges dulled slightly from last year's campaign. Spears lean against beams, collecting dust near the smoke-blackened rafters. Shields are repurposed for everyday use, a board to cover a drafty hole, or even a makeshift tray for carrying food. The tools of battle are still present, but they lose their urgency. Winter strips them of drama and makes them oddly domestic. The warriors themselves, those who boast of daring raids when meat is flowing, also change character. In summer, they are fierce and restless, eyes glinting with ambition. In winter, you see them hunched over looms, awkwardly weaving cords, or sitting cross-legged by the fire carving runes into bits of wood. They are not lesser men for it. They're simply men who must endure like everyone else. Even the fiercest sword hand cannot fight the snow. Of course, not all aggression vanishes. Tensions in close quarters still rise. Quarrels break out between brothers forced to share straw beds, or between neighbors disputing whose goats trampled whose hay. But these are small, personal skirmishes, contained within the smoky confines of the longhouse. No sagas will be sung of the winter argument over missing firewood. The grand epics wait until the thaw. The quiet of warfare also has its strategic side. Winter is when plans are laid. Round the fire, whispers of future raids weave into the smoke. Leaders count their resources, debating which fort to sail from, which coastlines look vulnerable. Maps, if they exist, are crude sketches in the dirt, erased and redrawn by idle fingers. There is a sense that while swords may rest, minds are sharpening. The stillness of winter is a pause, not an end. For you sitting in this lull, there is a strange comfort. The knowledge that the horizon holds no marauding ships, that your village will not be burned by surprise attack, allows a rare calm. Winter is cruel, but it is at least predictably cruel. You know what to fear? The cold, the hunger, the endless nights. Human enemies wait until the sea lanes reopen. In this way, winter becomes a peacekeeper of sorts. Stern, freezing, uncompromising one, but a peacekeeper nonetheless. Even the most ambitious chieftain respects its rule. War can be postponed, but nature never negotiates. And so the longhouse becomes the battlefield of patience rather than bloodshed. Survival is the only campaign, and victory is measured not in land gained or treasure seized, but in whether your family emerges alive when the ice finally begins to crack. Yet even as warfare rests, other kinds of movement never fully stop. Good stories and small exchanges still travel, carried along snowy paths or by hardy messengers on skis. Which brings us to another winter constant, the quiet but persistent rhythm of trade and travel. Even when the world seems frozen in place, the cold doesn't just creep into your bones, it also creeps into your health. Winter in Viking Scandinavia is not simply about surviving hunger or keeping fires burning. It's about enduring the constant nagging threat of illness in a world without doctors as you know them. Coughs echo in the longhouse like a chorus, and once one person falls sick, the close quarters almost guarantee that everyone else will too. You can try to keep your distance, but when you're all pressed together on straw mats, breathing the same smoky air, distance is a fantasy. The smoke itself doesn't help. Fires smolder day and night, filling the longhouse with warmth, but also with a haze that stings the eyes and clogs the lungs. After weeks of breathing it, your chest feels heavy, and that winter cough becomes part of your daily soundtrack. Congratulations, you now live in what's essentially a poorly ventilated, oversized chimney. Modern advice about cracking a window would be met with laughter here. The nearest window is a gap in the roof, already stuffed with cloth to stop the wind. Food, too, plays its part in illness. Your diet leans hard on dried fish, smoked meat, and porridge thickened with whatever grains were stored. Fresh vegetables are rare luxuries, perhaps a shriveled onion or a cabbage that managed not to rot in storage. Without enough variety, your body begins to crave what it can name. Vitamins you've never heard of but desperately need. Teeth loosen, gums ache, and healing slows. If you cut your hand splitting wood, the wound lingers, raw and red, because your body simply doesn't have the resources to patch it quickly. Then there are fevers. Simple fever in the modern world is often manageable. Here it's frightening. There's no thermometer, no clean linens, no neat little tablets to bring the heat down. Instead, you might be wrapped in more blankets, given bitter herbs, and prayed over. Sometimes you recover, sometimes you don't. The uncertainty is as heavy as the illness itself. Children are especially vulnerable. You watch them curled up near the hearth, faces flushed, breath quick and shallow. Their small bodies don't fight off infection as easily. Families grow used to loss, but that doesn't mean it ever hurts less. Grief is woven into the rhythm of winter, like frost in the fields, and yet the community does what it can. Women skilled in herbs gather dried plants saved from summer yarrow. Juniper and gellicond brew them into teas meant to soothe. A healer might chant or carve protective runes into wood, not just as treatment, but as reassurance. Belief itself becomes medicine. If you trust that the gods are watching, you bear your sickness a little easier. The longhouse, though stifling, also provides a kind of collective care. When you are weak, others cover your chores. A neighbor might slip you a ladle of broth or rub your aching chest with animal fat warmed by the fire. It's not much, but it's what there is. Illness here is less about cure and more about endurance. You survive by being carried along in the current of community, one coughing body leaning on another. The irony is that, in the silence of winter warfare, it's illness that fights the hardest battle. And unlike raiders or rival clans, this enemy cannot be scared away by swords. It seeps in quietly, stubbornly, and waits for you to weaken. Still, just as winter itself eventually loosens its grip, so do most illnesses. Bodies mend, coughs fade, fevers break. The survivors step outside, pale but alive, when the snow begins to soften. And those who remain carry stories of endurance because sickness, like hunger or cold, becomes part of what shapes the Viking way of living. And as you recover, weak but grateful, you'll notice another rhythm beginning. The constant, repetitive labor of tending fires, fetching wood, preparing meals that keep everyone alive. Which leads us directly into the endless cycle of winter chores that define survival. Death in winter is not unusual in Viking Scandinavia. Illness, hunger, and sheer cold all take their toll. And when someone passes the living or faced with a challenge you might not expect, what to do with the body when the ground itself has become an unyielding slab of ice. In summer, a burial mound could be raised quickly, the soil turned with relative ease. But in January, the earth is as hard as iron, and no amount of swinging a spade will persuade it otherwise. You find yourself part of the grim ritual, not because you want to, but because everyone must. In a village where labor is shared, even grief is communal. Tools you use: shovels, axes, picking against the frozen ground with sharp, metallic cracks, but the soil refuses to give. It feels like trying to dig into stone. The work is exhausting, each blow rebounding into your arms. You attempt to chip away at frostbitten earth, reminding you how small you are against winter's grip. Sometimes people improvise. Fires are built directly on the chosen patch of earth, their heat slowly softening the frozen soil beneath. It takes hours, sometimes days, of carefully tending the flames, scraping away charred ground layer by layer until the pickaxe can finally bite. The fire itself becomes part of the ceremony, a slow coaxing of the earth to let go, to make space for the dead. Standing there, you feel the smoke in your throat, your eyes watering as the living burn precious wood just to break into the earth. In harsher winters, even that is not possible. Instead, bodies are stored until the thaw, wrapped in cloaks, laid out inside buildings or sheltered places. They wait in a limbo between death and burial. It is unsettling to pass by and know that your kin rests not beneath the ground, but just beyond the walls, kept from their final place by nothing more than frost. And yet, in its own way, this too becomes tradition. The community gathers, tells stories, and tends to the memory of the departed until the season permits a proper farewell. When at last the ground yields, burials are carried out with the solemnity of relief. Grave goods, simple tools, weapons, a brooch, or a carved bead are placed with the body. Even in the harshest winter, respect demands tokens for the journey into the afterlife. The snow may bite your face as you lower the body, the wind may howl in your ears, but the act is carried through with care. Death does not wait for spring, and neither does duty. You notice how quiet these burials are. There is no grand procession, no elaborate speeches. The weather does not allow for lingering. The people gather, murmur their words, and retreat to warmth as quickly as possible. Grief is compressed by necessity. What matters is not the performance of mourning, but the fact that the task has been done, that the departed is given their rightful place, however delayed or improvised. In moments like this, you feel how fragile life is in Viking Scandinavia. Winter is not only a test of endurance for the living, but a barrier even for the dead. The struggle to bury loved ones is a reminder that nature does not bend to human will. It must be negotiated with, even begged from, in the form of fire, patience, and persistence. And once the burial is complete, the living return to their survival. The longhouse still needs firewood, children still need food, and animals still need care. Winter leaves little space for prolonged mourning. When yet as you settle back into routine, you feel the weight of what's been lost, carried quietly into the next season. Death and burial and frozen ground leave a mark not just on the soil, but on the hearts of those who endure it. And as the village turns again to daily survival thoughts, drift to the small hopes and small pleasures that soften winter. Edged like the sound of distant trade, the hint of a journey, or the rare treasure of something new arriving across the snow. For weeks you've been counting the days in darkness, each sunrise so brief it feels more like an intermission than a morning. But then, in the deep of winter, something shifts. Not in the weather, it's still mercilessly cold, but in the mood of the people. This is the time for a midwinter feast, what later centuries would call Yule. Against all logic, when food is scarcest and spirits lowest, the Vikings throw their most important celebrations. You weary from the endless routine of chopping wood and coughing in smoke, suddenly find yourself drawn into a world of flickering firelights, laughter, and food that miraculously goes beyond dried fish. Preparations begin days in advance. You see the longhouse cleaned as best as anyone can manage in winter. Straw swept aside and replaced, benches repaired with whatever wood scraps remain. Candles and oil lamps are lit in greater numbers, filling the space with a golden haze that almost hides the sooty rafters. Outside, snow is packed down to create clear paths, and evergreen branches are brought inside to remind everyone of life that still dares to endure. The smell of pine mixes with smoke, and suddenly the room feels less like a smokehouse and more like a hall fit for the gods. The food, scarce as it is, becomes the heart of the feast. Livestock that would never survive until spring is slaughtered, its meat roasted, boiled, and shared. Ale and mead flow more freely than at any other time of year, brewed and saved specifically for this occasion. You drink from a horn passed down the bench, the taste sweet and sharp, and feel warmth spread through your body even as the cold scratches at the door. For one night, hunger loosens its grip. Your belly fills, your fingers relax, and you remember what it feels like to live instead of merely endure. But feasting is not just about food. It is about binding the community together. Neighbors gather, stories are told, and songs are sung, some bawdy, some reverent. The skald or storyteller takes their place, weaving sagas that stretch back generations, reminding everyone that hardship is nothing new, and that survival is itself a victory. Children laugh, elders nod knowingly, and you feel the longhouse alive in a way it hasn't been since the harvest. The spiritual weight of the feast is never far away. Cups are raised to the gods Odin for wisdom, Thor for protection, Freyr for fertility of land and livestock. Toasts are also made to ancestors, their names spoken aloud, so they too may join the circle in memory if not in body. In that moment, the living and the dead, the divine and the mortal, all seem to sit shoulder to shoulder in the glowing warmth. It's easy to forget, as the laughter rises, that the feast is also strategic. Sharing now ensures survival later. Every guest who eats today is a guest who will remember generosity when food runs short in another month. Bonds are strengthened with each horn of mead, debts of friendship reinforced. Winter is not only endured through firewood and clothing, it is endured through loyalty. By the end of the night, you are drowsy, heavy with food, lulled by the rhythm of drum beats and the rise and fall of voices. Outside, the snow continues to fall silently, piling against the walls. But inside, you feel the rarest of winter gifts, warmth not just of body, but of spirit. For a little while, the season's cruelty is forgotten, replaced by abundance, however temporary. And as you drift towards sleep in the afterglow of the feast, as the fire crackling low, you know that tomorrow the hunger, the cold, and the hardship will return. Yet for tonight you have seen how joy itself can be an act of defiance against winter. Soon enough, though, the feasting ends, the ale runs dry. And survival once again depends on vigilance, the kind that turns its eye not only to the sky, but to the ever-shifting balance between faith, luck, and the gods. Winter, for all its harshness, is also a season of strange productivity. When the fields lie silent under snow and the seas are locked with ice, you discover that idle hands are not an option. In the longhouse, where smoke curls against the rafters and the light filters dimly through small roof vents, winter transforms into a time for crafting and repairing the quiet industry that keeps a community stitched together. You start with the tools. Axes dulled from chopping wood are honed by hand, their edges kissed against whetstones until they gleam faintly in the firelight. Broken handles are replaced, shaped carefully from seasoned wood stored last summer. A spearhead bent in some forgotten skirmish is reheated in the hearth, hammered straight on an anvil small enough to be carried inside. The rhythm of hammer against iron becomes almost soothing, a heartbeat for the household. If summer is about using tools, winter is about tending them, making sure they're ready when the thaw demands labor again. Clothing also gets its share of attention. Wool spun from the autumn's shearing now finds its way to spindles and looms. You watch as women deftly pull fibers into thread, twisting and weaving with practiced patience. The sound of the loom soft, steady, like a distant drum fills the smoky air. Blankets are patched, cloaks repaired, mittens restitched. The smallest scraps are repurposed into socks, because in a land where frost bites hardest at the toes, no piece of wool is wasted. There's a quiet satisfaction in seeing a garment reborn from what was nearly discarded. Carving, too, becomes a winter ritual. Men whittle wood into combs, spoons, and handles, their knives flicking chips onto the floor until a soft carpet of shavings gathers. Children play with offkits, carving simple toys, horses, boats, little figures of gods or animals. You pick one up, rough but charming, and realize that in this season, craftsmanship is as much about passing time as it is about survival. When the outside world freezes, creativity becomes a kind of inner fire. Even boats, stranded for months on icy shores, are not forgotten. Their planks are checked for cracks, tar heated over the fire to seal gaps, ropes untangled and rebraided. You run your hand along the hull of a ship resting in a shed, smelling the pitch and wood smoke, imagining it slicing through waves again. Though the sea lies unreachable, the ship is never allowed to sleep too long. To neglect it would be to risk ruin when spring finally calls the crew to water. The longhouse itself demands constant maintenance. Gaps in the thatch are stuffed with moss and animal hides. Posts are tightened with wedges, beams rubbed with grease to resist splitting. It's tedious work, but in a winter storm, the difference between a snug corner and a draft that gnaws, your bones can feel like life and death. Repairs are not glamorous, but neither is frostbite. As you sit among these crafts and chores, you notice how the atmosphere shifts. The work is not frantic, it is patient, almost meditative. The world outside rages with wind and snow, but inside, human hands are steadily undoing the damage of time. It's a rhythm older than raiding, quieter than farming, yet no less vital.
Yes.
And when your fingers grow sore from stitching or shaping, you look to the hearth. There, someone carves runes onto a piece of driftwood, not for utility but for meaning. Repairs are not only about tools and clothes, but about spirits too. Winter crafts are acts of care, of preparation, of ensuring that when the world thaws, you and your people are ready not just with sharp axes, but with renewed strength and stories etched into wood. Soon, these rhythms of repair give way to other, more mysterious rhythms, the rituals, omens, and signs that people lean on to make sense of the merciless season. Step inside the Viking longhouse, and you immediately understand why it is more than a building. It is survival itself. From the outside, it doesn't look like much, an elongated rectangle, low to the ground, built from timber and turf. Its roof sagging slightly under the weight of snow. But once you cross the threshold, the air shifts. The longhouse is where fire, food, family, faith, all gather under one roof, a single heartbeat against the wilderness. The first thing you notice is the warmth, though warmth is relative. It's not the cozy, even heat, from modern radiators. Instead, it's patchy, smoky warmth that clings near the central fire. If you're lucky enough to sit close, your shins roast while your back shivers. Step away even a little, and the cold drafts snake down from the roof beams, reminding you that insulation is more hope than fact. But compared to the howl of the wind outside, the longhouse feels like a sanctuary, however imperfect. Your eyes adjust slowly to the dim light. The only glow comes from the fire pit and a few flickering oil lamps. Smoke hangs thick, rising sluggishly toward a vent in the roof that never seems quite wide enough. The rafters are blackened from years of fires, their surfaces coated in soot so deep they look more like charred bone than wood. You cough softly, your lungs reminding you that every breath carries a little taste of ash. And yet everyone around you carries on as if the haze is normal, because here it is. Look closer, and the longhouse reveals its many roles. It's a kitchen with cauldrons bubbling over embers, filling the room with the sharp, salty scent of broth. It's a bedroom. 2 families sleep along the walls on benches layered with straw and wool. At night, the space hums with snores, murmurs, and the restless shifting of livestock kept inside for extra heat. Yes, your bedmates include goats and sheep, their earthy musk blending with wood smoke, until it becomes the very perfume of winter. It's also a workshop. By firelight, hands are busiest, pinning wool, carving wood, repairing harnesses. The longhouse does not rest simply because the world outside has. Instead, its walls gather the energy of survival, each task small but essential. Each sound, the scrape of a blade, the clatter of tools blending into a low, constant hum. Most importantly, the longhouse is a gathering place. When the night stretches impossibly long, people lean together here, trading stories, singing, or simply existing side by side. The longhouse is a buffer not only against weather, but against despair. It holds the laughter of children, the growl of an elder sharing advice, the rhythm of feet stamping when a song demands a beat. It is a shelter for spirit as much as for body. Still, the longhouse is far from luxurious. Space is cramped, privacy non-existent, and the air thick enough to chew. Fleas and lice find easy homes in the straw bedding, and no matter how many times you sweep, the floor is always dirty. You might long for solitude, but winter offers none. Instead, you learn the art of coexistence, of ignoring snores, of sharing food bowls, of accepting that closeness is both comfort and irritation. In the end, the longhouse is less a house than a world in miniature. Everything that matters happens within its smoky walls. Birth, death, meals, quarrels, laughter, worship, they all play out here, layered together like the soot on the rafters. You realize that stepping outside feels less like leaving a home and more like leaving behind civilization itself. And as you sit by the fire, straw crackling softly beneath you, the walls humming with the life of your community, as you recognize the longhouse for what it truly is, a fragile but determined answer to the season. It is proof that even in the darkest, coldest months, people create not just shelter, but a place to belong. From within this cocoon of wood and smoke, your thoughts drift naturally to what lies beyond the endless forests, frozen fjords, and the long, treacherous paths that connect one community to another. The longhouse may hold you close, but eventually, survival also depends on what comes in from the outside world. By the time late winter drags its heels across the land, You feel as though you've been living in the longhouse for years rather than months. The days are still short, the air still stings your lungs, and the snowbanks outside loom like walls. But beneath it all, there's a subtle shift. You begin to sense the seasons hold loosening, even if just by a fingertip. Waiting for the thaw becomes its own occupation, as real as chopping wood or stirring porridge. You notice it first in the sound. The endless silence of frozen nights is occasionally broken by dripping water, a tentative trickle from the eaves, as the sun lingers just a moment longer in the sky. It's not much a mere suggestion of change, but it's enough to spark whispers. People nod at one another knowingly. The thaw will come. You learn quickly that hope in winter is fragile, so no one celebrates too loudly. But the smallest signs, a patch of softer snow, a crow's call in the morning, are tucked away like treasures. Inside, anticipation has a physical weight. Supplies have dwindled. Grain stores are thin, salted meat is tough and leathery, and the ale casks stand nearly empty. Every day you calculate how much longer you can stretch what's left. Meals grow smaller, yet patience grows thinner. Children complain, elders sigh, and even the strongest warriors stare longingly at their axes, itching for work beyond splitting logs. The thaw isn't just about warmth, it's about escape from monotony. Still, waiting is an art the Vikings know well. You busy your hands with repairs, carving, weaving, or simply tending to the fire as though stoking embers might hurry the sun along. Night, stories lean heavily on promises of spring fields that will once again open. Journeys that can be planned, seas that will thaw. You find yourself clinging to these stories as much as to the wool blanket around your shoulders. They are reminders that the season has an end, even if you cannot yet see it. There is also a wariness to this waiting. Everyone remembers winters that stretched longer than expected. When spring was late and famine pressed its thumb on the village, you glance at the last sack of barley and wonder what happens if the thaw lingers another month. Patience balances uneasily with dread, as if the season itself might overhear your hopes and decide to punish them, so you learn to wait quietly. You step outside into the dazzling glare of snow under a pale sun, hear the faint crack of ice shifting on the river, and breathe in air that no longer feels like shards of glass. You let yourself imagine the ground softening, the first shoots of green daring to push upward, the sound of waves once again lapping against a boat's hull. For now, it's still a dream. But dreams are what get you through the last hardest stretch. When you return to the longhouse, brushing frost from your cloak, you see the others waiting, too busy, restless, hopeful in their own ways. The thaw is not here yet, but it is near enough to shape every conversation, every chore, every glance toward the horizon. Waiting in this moment is both the hardest work and the most necessary. Soon the snow will melt, rivers will rise, and the world will awaken. But until then, you live in this strange limbo, suspended between survival and renewal. The thaw will come, it always does, but never as quickly as you'd like. And while you wait, thoughts naturally turn to what these long winters mean in the larger story of life here. How people remember them, how they shape identity, and how endurance itself becomes a legacy passed down through generations. When the thaw finally arrives, and the ground softens enough for plows, and the rivers once again carry boats toward distant shores, winter does not vanish, lingers, but not only in memory. It is carried forward in stories, told and retold by firelight, where each long, dark season is reshaped into something more than hardship. In a world where writing is rare, you discover that survival itself becomes folklore. You hear elders speak of winters so fierce that the snow swallowed barns whole. Perhaps that was an exaggeration, or perhaps it wasn't. Children widen their eyes at tales of wolves circling the edges of villages, their eyes like coals in the dark. You smile quietly, because you know the reality was less dramatic and far more tedious. Endless chopping, endless shivering, endless waiting. But when boredom transforms into legend, the long nights suddenly sound more heroic. In the telling, winter becomes an adversary worthy of sagas. Every family carries its own stories. A grandmother may recall the year when fish traps froze solid and neighbors shared what little they had. A father might boast of the time he braved a blizzard to fetch medicine for a sick child. You begin to notice that these memories rarely dwell on misery alone. Instead, they are polished into lessons about courage, generosity, or simple stubbornness. Winter, in this way, becomes a teacher that keeps speaking long after the snow is gone. And then there are the myths, the grander tales, where winter is woven into the fabric of the gods. You hear of Skadi, the giantess of the mountains, and the Hunt, who carries the season's chill wherever she goes. You hear of Fimbulwinter, the endless freeze that will precede Ragnarok when the world itself collapses. These stories are not told to frighten but to frame your struggles set against cosmic patterns. Your frostbitten toes placed on the same stage as destiny itself. It is oddly comforting, this idea that your suffering is not meaningless but part of a larger cycle. Children especially cling to these tales, retelling them with the exaggerations only youth can supply. By spring, the wolf at the door has grown larger, the snow deeper, the fire smaller, and somehow the storyteller braver. You can't help but chuckle knowing that memory is always embroidered with imagination. Yet you also know that in a land where winters always return, stories are not just entertainment. They are rehearsal for survival. They remind each generation what must be endured and how. So winter is never just endured and forgotten. It is carried forward, stored not in granaries, but in the minds of those who lived through it. Every tale of hardship becomes another layer of insulation for the future, another reminder that people have been here before and will be here again. The stories, like the longhouse walls, may be smoky and rough around the edges, but they hold. They always hold. And as you lean back by the fire, listening to voices weaving past and present together, you realize that this act of remembering is itself a form of warmth. It carries you through, reminding you that even the harshest winters cannot freeze out the human urge to share, to connect, to turn suffering into something almost beautiful. From here, the thought drifts naturally to the close of our journey, to reflect not just on Viking winters themselves, but on what their endurance says about the human spirit and about our own quiet gratitude for softer blankets and warmer rooms today. And so, as the last embers of the Viking winter fade in your mind, you return quietly to the present. You're no longer in a longhouse filled with smoke and animal breath, no longer listening to sagas meant to hold back the dark. You're here, in your own room, under your own blankets, with a modern sort of warmth that would have seemed like pure sorcery to those who came before. It's tempting to imagine the Vikings only as raiders and warriors, but when the nights stretched for months and the cold settled into every joint, they were mostly what you are now. People trying to stay comfortable, sharing stories, waiting for light to return. The drama of conquest makes headlines and sagas, but the quiet resilience of survival makes history possible at all. Perhaps that's the legacy of those brutal winters. They remind you that endurance itself is an achievement. Said even the smallest act, banking a fire, patching a roof, ladling stew for a neighbor, can echo across centuries in the form of memory, custom, or tale. Hardship was real, but so was the stubbornness to face it together. Tonight, you might be thankful for the little things you hardly notice. Insulated walls, steady food, the hum of a heater, or the hush of a fan. None of it is dramatic, but all of it is miraculous compared to the world you've just walked through. And maybe that is what sleep is too, a nightly thaw, where the day's coldness softens and warmth seeps back in. So let the stories of Viking winters settle like snow over your thoughts. Let them pile softly until the world grows quiet. You've seen the struggle, you've felt the endurance, and now you can let it all drift away. The fire is low, the night is steady, and you don't have to endure anything at all. Rest well. Good night.